Something broke last week. You didn't call anyone. You opened a tab, started researching, figured it out, and you were fine. You're always fine. That's the part nobody talks about, not the strength of it. Everyone sees the strength. They call you capable, independent, low maintenance. They say it like a compliment, and you receive it like one. But somewhere underneath that, there's a quieter truth you've probably never said out loud to anyone. You don't reach out. Not really. Not when it counts. And it's not because you don't want to. It's because somewhere along the way, wanting stopped feeling like enough of a reason to try. John Bowlby spent decades studying how people attach to each other. What he found in the data and in real human lives was a pattern he called compulsive self-reliance. It doesn't come from strength, it comes from a specific kind of early lesson. The lesson goes like this. When you reached outward, nothing reliable came back. Maybe the people around you were warm sometimes and completely unreachable other times. No pattern, no consistency you could count on. Maybe need was met with silence or frustration or just an absence where something should have been. A child's brain doesn't conclude that those people failed. It concludes that reaching out doesn't work. So it stops. And then it keeps that conclusion for the next 20, 30, 40 years, running quietly in the background like a program nobody ever closed. Here's what that actually looks like in a real life. It's spending an entire weekend teaching yourself a skill that a single phone call could have solved in an hour. Not because you couldn't ask, because asking felt harder than starting from zero. It's typing a message that starts with, "Hey, can I talk to you about something?" and deleting it. Not once, regularly, for years. It's going through something devastating, processing it almost entirely alone, and showing up 2 weeks later genuinely okay, which confuses the people around you, which honestly confuses you too. These aren't personality quirks. They're habits so deeply repeated they've dropped below the level of conscious choice. They just run automatically, without asking permission. Now here's the part that almost never gets mentioned. People who operate this way tend to have an unusually fast, layered internal world. They think about their own thinking constantly. They catch themselves mid-reaction and step outside it to examine what's happening. They run quiet postmortems on decisions made weeks ago. The internal conversation is detailed, nuanced, often more honest than anything they'll say out loud, which sounds useful, and it is. But it creates a strange trap. By the time something has been processed enough to share, it's already been through so many internal revisions that putting it into words for another person feels almost reductive, like trying to explain a piece of music by reading the sheet notes aloud. Something real doesn't survive the translation, so they don't try. Or they do, and the version that comes out feels so thin compared to what was actually happening inside that saying it almost feels worse than silence. People on the outside read that as cold, private, closed off. What's actually happening is that the person is standing at a gap with no obvious first step across it. You probably recognize some of this already. Here's where it gets genuinely dangerous. At some point, quietly, with no single moment you could point to, figuring things out alone stops being something you do. It becomes something you are. I handle my own stuff. I don't need much from people. And once that hardens into identity, accepting help stops feeling optional. It starts feeling like a contradiction. Like agreeing to something that clashes with who you've decided you are. The person who won't ask for directions and the person who can't ask for what they need emotionally, same locked door, same key they're not sure they still have. In relationships, this creates a gap that hurts on both sides. The people who love someone like this feel real warmth, genuine care, but also this persistent sense that the last 10% is always just slightly out of reach. That closeness is available up to a certain point, and then something invisible closes. What makes it complicated is that the person on the inside feels that gap too. They see it just as clearly. They're not unaware of it. They just don't know how to close it from where they're standing. Here's what I want to be careful not to do. I don't want to frame all of this as damage, because that misses something true. The person who learned to handle things alone built something real. A tolerance for sitting with difficulty that most people never develop. When something breaks, materially, emotionally, relationally, they don't collapse into whoever's nearby. They hold themselves through it in a life that will eventually hand you situations where no one can fully help you anyway. That capacity is remarkable. The question worth sitting with is simpler than it sounds. Is the self-reliance being chosen right now by the adult living in that body? Or is it running automatically, written in a different era, still protecting against things that stopped being real years ago, still going because nobody told it to stop? Survival patterns don't come with expiration dates. They just keep functioning, long past the conditions that made them necessary. The person who never asked for help didn't get there by deciding people weren't worth leaning on. They got there by learning, slowly, through repetition, that leaning didn't produce anything reliable. The brain that absorbed that lesson did exactly what it was supposed to. It was trying to keep them safe in the only way it knew how. It just doesn't need to stay in that mode forever, because the need for connection didn't disappear. It's still in there. The want for someone to just know without having to go back to the beginning, without it becoming a whole thing, that want is alive. It stopped knocking, but it never stopped wanting to come in. This isn't just who you are, it's where you've been. And a history, unlike a personality, is allowed to end differently than it started. If this felt familiar, the next video explores something deeper: how intelligence can quietly shape itself around survival. It's called traumatic intelligence, and most people don't realize they have it.